From the Zoomerplex in historic Liberty Village, the Zoomer with Marissa Semkiw.
When Donald Trump announced his candidacy to be the Republican nominee on June 16, 2015, with the vow to make America great again, many commentators wrote it off as a PR stunt. But as of November 8, 2016, the businessman and reality TV star officially became president-elect of the United States. So how did this happen, and what does it mean for Canada? Before we dive into the discussion, let's tee up the topic.
While slightly losing the popular vote, Trump ended up with the Electoral College of several states the Democrats have recently dominated. Traditional battlegrounds like Florida, Ohio, Iowa, while picking up other big prizes like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. Who were Trump voters? While winning big with 63% of white males, 53% of white women voted for Trump, while only 43% voted for Hillary. Did you hear that Trump alienated the Latino voter? He captured 29% of the Latino vote to Hillary's 65%. That's more than the Republican candidate received in the last election. Perhaps most telling, 69% of voters said they were dissatisfied or angry with the federal government, while 63% felt the condition of the national economy was poor.
One big question remains: how will a Trump presidency affect Canada? There's a lot at stake. The Great White North is America's largest trading partner. Can Prime Minister Trudeau and President-elect Trump even get along? Or will the 49th become a big divide? We have a great panel today of journalists, pundits, political consultants, an author and a historian. And joining us via Beam technology from Washington, D.C. is Tom Rogan, a columnist with the National Review and Opportunity Lives. Come on over here, Tom. Thank you all for joining me. Now, Donald Trump's win was a shock that shook the world, or so it seemed in the media. Conrad, let me start with you because you are a personal friend of Donald Trump. He defied pollsters. He defied the Republican Party, the Democratic Party. I've never known a candidate to face such headwinds, and he won. How did he do it?
Well, 2/3 of the population thought the country was going in the wrong direction, and while President Obama was adequately popular personally, hovering a little above the 50% level, there was a widespread feeling that the country had suffered a terrible streak of misgovernment from both parties and both branches of the government, legislative and executive. And indeed, my own view is that it has been the worst 15 years of misgovernment in American history, including the 10 years that preceded the Civil War and the 3 presidents in the 20s between Woodrow Wilson and Franklin D. Roosevelt. And he ran against the Obamas, the Bushes, the Clintons, his own leadership. He ran against the far left with Sanders and the far right with Cruz. So he was actually, with Mrs. Clinton, between the 30-yard lines. He wasn't an extremist, but he did manage to capture the factors that your intro referred to, of great anger in the country. And the United States is a country that has never been in absolute and relative decline in its history until the last 15 years, and they don't like it. And he managed to be the candidate of change, the only candidate of change on offer. And though certainly clearly a candidate that many people had real problems with, he was the only representative of change.
There are 2 facets to an election, obviously. A candidate has to put forward his or her policies for the public and get the public on board with that, and also they have to sort of discredit the opponent. It's been said that Hillary Clinton was unsuccessful at doing the former, that she was just very good at discrediting her opponent, calling him racist, sexist, and it backfired. What say you?
Well, I don't think she had to call him those things. He behaved in a racist and sexist
But she
manner.
fixated on that.
Well, she fixated on a few things because he was fixating on them. There wasn't, I just remember through the whole process, there was not a day where there was some sort of eruption that would take people off policy matters or anything apart from what you said. And I think she had significant headwinds. She had WikiLeaks, she had the emails, she had the Republican infrastructure going after her since Benghazi over and over again. She had sexism, she had a lot of baggage that the press played on and gave Trump a pass because they were being graded on a curve. So I think, and let's not forget, she still won the popular vote, and they're still counting, and the margin will increase. So I don't think she didn't get her message out. I think the way it was structured, including with the Electoral College, allowed him to win, and he was very smart by focusing on those Rust Belt states. But I don't think it was a complete blowout, and she did such a bad job because she did show success in the popular vote.
Michael?
I think it's funny to talk about the Electoral College now because leading into Election Day, everyone was talking about how impossible Donald Trump's map is. It's going to be so hard for him to win. Don't worry about the national polls because state by state, how is he going to build it together? And then he went and won states that haven't been Republican since Ronald Reagan. So I think he deserves a lot of credit for running a very underrated campaign. I did not see it coming. I'll be forthright on that, but full credit to him on running a shockingly brilliant campaign.
Adrienne?
Well, it's only brilliant in retrospect.
Well, it works.
Well, no, but it did work. I'm not saying he didn't, but let's
Suzanne,
not pretend he didn't make a lot of
It's
mistakes.
the only person who's ever taken over an American political party without any background in public office or a high military command. That alone was a miracle.
Well, that says more about the Republican Party, and what he's set up now is kind of is going to be very Game of Thrones, House of Cards.
And it said a lot about where the electorate was, where their mindset was, for all the reasons that Conrad has already mentioned, the change agent. And she was such a dislikable candidate,
Well,
one
she
of the
was
worst
liked
that the
more than
Democrats have
him.
put up for many, many years, since Dukakis, I would argue. She was a horrible candidate. She's a bad campaigner. She had great surrogates around her, but none of that mattered. And she was so obsessed with this whole idea, he's just so bad. She wasn't providing what I think a lot of Americans were going to perceive as change. And when change is in the air, it's very hard to stop that. They just saw her as a 4 more year extension
Yeah,
of the
but
last
change
year,
is
the 8
always
years with
in the
Obama.
air. That was Jimmy Carter. That was Bill Clinton. That was Barack Obama. It happens ever so
But
often
it just
in
goes
those
to show you
politics.
that you had an Obama and you get a Trump. You know, in
I
different.
think that-
And we had Stephen Harper. We got Justin Trudeau. I mean, these things happen.
The irony of the campaign is that after 8 years of the Republicans doing absolutely everything that they could to freeze up government and make it ungovernable for Obama, they were then able to use that as a pledge about how they would do things differently. It's really a tragedy of what we saw.
Barack Obama wasn't shy about using executive orders over
What
and
else
over and
was he
over again.
supposed to
He
do when
wasn't
they
Mr.
blocked everything?
Cooperation.
He was supposed to come and show up to
Okay,
the
can we
Capitol.
let's just recall that the day of his inauguration in 2008, Mitch McConnell said, we're going to make him a one-term president. We're going to do everything. We're going to block, and obstruct. So
The Democrats said that about every Republican president for
Suzanne, at
Well,
that
somehow
point,
they
the
didn't do that.
Democrats controlled the Congress. I offered you the thought that there was no argument to re-elect the Democrats. The Obama administration was not a successful administration, nor was the George W. Bush one before.
That's an opinion.
No, but there was no argument. They didn't put forth an argument saying we're standing in our record as a party in office. Mrs. Clinton was in the administration the first term. We deserve to be re-elected. None of it. Their entire attack was an attack on Donald Trump.
Hold
I
on.
do think she made mistakes,
Tom-
but I think you didn't really have to attack him. Like there's a thing called character and character
Yeah, but
expected.
that is all bunk. He's not a sexist. He's not a racist.
He had his own self-inflicted wounds.
Okay,
There's no
I'm
question
gonna
about that.
say I'm gonna say a few things. And one is like okay, sorry. Okay,
Go
you
ahead,
go.
Tom.
Go.
I'm not used to this from my McLaughlin Group experience. I guess my mic was on mute or something for a second there. A few points. Number one, I think James Buchanan, quite clearly, in all due respect to Conrad, but James Buchanan was, there was some problematic elements. He was the president before Lincoln, some problematic elements there. But I would say the reality, quite frankly, of the Trump victory, and I say this as someone who is not a Trump fan, is that we hear about the baggage. Well, the baggage that Hillary Clinton had, the baggage Hillary Clinton packed herself through poor choices. And President Obama, yes, Republicans did obstruct him. But yes, most of the American people, I think, vested in terms of Donald Trump's vote, wanted that to be blocked. They don't believe the country was going in the right direction. And that's why you've seen such a significant repudiation of his legacy in this man, Donald Trump, who, quite frankly, across the board, people, including supporters of his, we forget this, had very serious issues with. So there was a sea change and there was that dissatisfaction.
I want to bring this one point up, and I think it's important, and it was startling to a lot of people. Donald Trump, of course, was called a sexist repeatedly throughout the campaign from his opponents.
It demonstrated his sexism.
He won 53% of the white vote, of the white female vote.
And he won, and didn't Hillary get 88% of the black female vote or higher? 93%.
She got higher, but he got 4% of the black female vote, and it's important because it's up from Romney 4 years ago.
That's right. Yeah.
I mean, that matters. Romney never disparaged women the way that we heard.
Look,
he had Biden.
May I make a
to know that.
Donald doesn't disparage women. There was one tape.
Oh my God!
In fairness, you know, the Donald comments, he said stuff that was as offensive towards Marco Rubio's swedding habits.
That's right.
The fact that he was offensive across the board.
It's not helpful when everybody. Okay.
But it's atmospheric.
why can't
Her problems were indictable offenses. His are imputed attitudes.
But he's the actual one going on trial in December for the Trump University.
It's
right?
a civil case. It's not an indictable offense. It was a
Right.
shabby
Well, but the
business, so
FBI decided it wasn't indictable. So was the FBI wrong?
We will discuss this when we will discuss this when we come back.
The FBI director said that, in effect, she perjured herself in responding to FBI questions, but he wasn't going to indict her, which I agree with. I don't want her indicted, and I'm not anti-Hillary. But let's not deceive ourselves here. I mean, some of these things were not too suave. I mean, you can say Donald's a loudmouth, which he is at times. You can say that he's you can't say he's coarse. His conversation is a lot politer than hers, by the way. If you talk to them, I mean, you know, she's a fairly rough woman, you know. I mean, Donald is a gentleman.
She's also a nasty woman. We know that.
Okay, we will discuss this when we come back. We will discuss this when we come back.
But he's been smeared.
Will Trump-style politics gain traction north of the border? At least one major political candidate is saying just that. We'll discuss after the break.
Are you a fan of Donald Trump?
Not at all.
Why?
For obvious reasons. I think he's a bigot, he's a racist, and yeah, that's about it.
I think it's going to be good for the States, yeah?
Why?
Because he's a businessman.
I think, you know, people want to see a change in the establishment, and that's the driver here. That's what's happened with Brexit. I think that's what's happening with Trump.
What upsets me the most is the bigotry and the fact that he feels that it's okay to put down minorities, including women, and it's just really, really sad.
Trump?
Yeah.
Probably it's okay, yeah. My view is like we should give him a chance, like to see, you know, what the outcome is.
What's the scariest thing about Donald Trump that you think?
That he'll build that wall. I'm just scared because I thought all the great walls in the world came down.
Donald Trump, entertainer for sure. Businessman, definitely not. President, not even a chance.
Oh, don't even go down that street with me. It's disgusting. He shouldn't even be allowed to run. It's just horrible. I don't know how they allow somebody like that to lead a country. He's no role model for anybody. That's my opinion.
Welcome back. That was reaction from Canadians on the streets of Toronto by our videographer, Darren Maharaj. A big question remains, will Trump-style politics resonate north of the border? While only 17% of Canadians said they would have voted for Trump if they could have, one major Canadian political candidate seems to be betting on similar tactics. In an email to supporters after the election, Conservative leadership frontrunner Kelly Leitch wrote, "Tonight, our American cousins throughout the elites and elected Donald Trump as their next president. It's an exciting message and one that we need delivered in Canada as well. It's the message I'm bringing with my campaign to be the next Prime Minister of Canada." So, is this a winning message, Michael?
Well, Kelly Leitch, full disclosure, I am supporting for a leader, and I am doing that because she is the hardest working individual I know in or out of politics, is getting a great response from donors, from Conservative members, and new people who've never joined a political party before, who are actually taking out party memberships, paying their $15 because they like to hear someone who's looking at Ottawa and realizing that it's completely out of touch with the country, and she's ready to change that.
I am so discouraged to have a candidate who is openly racist, essentially campaigning.
What makes her racist?
It's odd.
She is talking about Canadian values. This is sort of a typical racist ploy to try to change the language of how we talk about things. We saw this so clearly in the US, where instead of talking about neo-Nazism or white supremacy, suddenly we had an alt-right. We sanitized the words. And here we have Kelly Leitch doing the exact same thing.
Well, her specific plan,
I don't think it's racist at all.
Well, let's be clear about what her plan is.
Let's
be clear about what her plan is. She was on Zoomer Radio AM 740 with host and VP of News Libby Znaimer talking about this particular policy we're referring to. So let's take a listen to that and we'll come back out and talk about it.
You are the lightning rod in the campaign for the Conservative leadership. Is that what you intended, or is that a surprise?
I think a lot of Canadians are hearing this discussion and find that they're getting a little sick and tired of being told what to think. They've been consistent. Canadians have been forthright. Screening individuals who are coming into this country for Canadian values, doing face-to-face interviews is important to them.
Okay, so
and the pushback on that I have found interesting. I really think the elites are out of touch.
Okay, so elites are out of touch, and she'd like to start screening immigrants before they come into the country. What about that is racist?
I didn't say that was particularly racist, but aren't immigrants already screened when they come in?
No.
But they're not.
Yeah.
They're not being interviewed. 1 in 10, I believe, is how many are actually having a physical face-to-face interview with an immigration officer. And what Ms. Leitch is proposing is let's up that number. And that's not an unreasonable thing to the average-minded Canadian who thinks, yes, I think that there should be an ability for someone to ask the question of whether or not you are someone who wants to be part of our Canadian family. That's not unreasonable.
I don't know enough about that policy to comment on it. I think the word racist is a very, very strong word, and I use it sparingly. I don't know what's in people's hearts. Back to Donald Trump, I do think that in his campaign, I think he used dog whistles and sort of what, as to Wanda's point, this whole idea of Steve Bannon in the White House. This guy said that his news organization was a platform for the alt-right. And I think that's very scary for people.
But I also think it's also dangerous to throw the word racist around so often just to shut down your opponent and to
No, but I think Donald Trump. No, but let's talk about Donald Trump.
It's the easiest argument to say you're a racist, you're a sexist, you're this, and it just stifles debate.
But Donald Trump was sued by the Justice Department for not allowing people of color. They put the
He has a perfect record as an equal opportunity employer. Being sued by the U.S., the fascistic, politicized U.S. Justice
the Hollywood,
Department.
the Central Park Five, Central Park Five. Suggesting, there's fault lines, there's nuances, and he's played every one. Do I think he's necessarily a racist? No. Do I think he's used certain headwinds in American culture and fault lines in that society to get a certain sort of passion out of the vote? I think he did, and I think that's clearly cynical. And so you see, right after Obama was elected, the incidence of hate crimes went up. Right after Trump has been elected, the incidence of hate crimes have gone up. And he has not used his platform. He said he won because of Twitter. He has tweeted about everything from the New York Times and everything, and he did not tweet "Stop it" when he went.
But he asked the nation on 60 Minutes.
But he did say "Stop it" on 60 Minutes.
A year and a half after his campaign began.
Well, 3 days after he won.
Prompted by Leslie Stahl, and why didn't he go on Twitter, which he thinks is more powerful than 60 Minutes?
Let's say Conrad's reaction.
On election.
He's in trouble. He doesn't tweet. He's in trouble.
Hold on, let's get
Steve Bannon as powerful as his chief of staff. Why send that message?
He's not his chief of staff.
No, he said he's going to make him as powerful. That's what he said.
Okay.
Yes.
And the president deserves to be surrounded by people who he is comfortable around. He is clearly comfortable around Mr. Bannon.
So the alt-right guy, he's comfortable around.
Alt-right? I don't understand why this is
that means alternate right. It doesn't.
Yeah, what's so terrible about it?
That's the new buzzword that they're using now about alt-right, and that this is something that's
more offensive to me than Steve Bannon.
It's the window dressing and the ugly gash that is.
Why is Van Jones offensive to you?
He's just as
okay, hold on. There's too many conversations happening.
If we look at what happened in Donald Trump's rallies, and if you watch them, you could hear the horror in his voice as he said, "Get him out of here! Get him out of here! Get him out!" repeatedly as his.
There's a very different
imagined atmospherics. It is completely irrelevant.
So what happens is he has allowed racism to go mainstream. He has taken those values that should be in the toilet, and he has allowed them to come mainstream.
He put them exactly there in his address on election night.
There has been a
CBS 60 Minutes.
There has been a
Donald isn't a racist. Give it a rest.
We act as if there was some sort of harmonious union before Donald Trump hit the campaign
Can
trail.
I just say one thing about this? So Mitch McConnell had a press conference, and they asked him a few questions, and they said, then he goes, the transition's great, Reince Priebus, great choice. They said, what about Steve Bannon being his advisor? Dead silence, wouldn't comment. Said, thank you, everyone, wouldn't even mention the name. This is the head of the Republican Party.
Perhaps that the congressional leaders are uncomfortable with the choice of a White House strategist
I think
is a good thing for the country.
Any
Congress
reasonable
has
person
been broken.
knows that Breitbart has done some things that are not acceptable. That is
you.
true.
And
but we
crimes,
don't
again-
know. We don't know the extent to which Bannon was involved in when Breitbart himself was doing the unacceptable.
Well, I can tell you what he told the LA Times. He told the LA Times that he created a platform for the alt-right. Once again, I'm not saying he's a racist. I don't know what's in the man's heart. But he saw an opportunity to get a certain sort of audience to his platform, and he did. Then he said that the two gentlemen who are the thought leaders of Breitbart, and you look at their quotes, and it's stuff about blacks, it's stuff about Jews. It's very, very offensive
He's Jewish
stuff.
himself.
Right.
I'd like to get Tom Rogan's perspective in here as someone from Washington, obviously. From my perspective, we act as if there was some sort of union before Donald Trump came onto the campaign trail. But as we know, racial divides were very strong before Donald Trump hit the campaign trail. What say you?
Well, look, racial divisions have been strong for a long time, but one of the things I think is interesting here, and as an American who grew up in the UK, it's especially interesting, that Canadians might find it interesting, is that the growth of what might be called the alt-right or the far alt-right in Europe has been happening for a very long time in much more severe ways than Donald Trump represents. And that is tangible if you speak to police officers, for example, in terms of the level of criminality that is attached to that. I actually think the reality here, we can litigate about the campaign and the narrative and the words used, but the functional reality is that a wide array of people, including Hispanic Americans, who Mr. Trump won, and I'm from National Review, right? We didn't like Trump, but including Hispanics who voted in larger numbers for Mr. Trump than they did for Mr. Romney, decided that the social justice they cared about more was the collapse of what they saw as their community bound up with employment opportunity. And so if we talk about social justice, I think it's very easy for us in the journalist world, let's say the upper middle class functionally, to be able to articulate things. But if you go to places like Allentown, Pennsylvania, and again, this is something I didn't pay enough attention to until later in the campaign. I hold my hands to that. The amount of physical pain that is rendered there is something that had a very direct electoral effect. I think it's way too simplistic to say that it's racism or weaponization. Too many people from too many demographics voted for Donald Trump to say that.
I agree with that, but I do think it was an aspect, as was sexism. I think it was a very complex stew that led to this result. And I do think, Michael Moore, who is as lefty as they come, he kept saying that Trump would win.
Will win.
He said, these are guys like me. The fact you'd see the so-called elites on all the talk shows from Morning Joe, right on down the line to the 11th hour, talking about the uneducated, white male, and just speaking about people in that way. But I just think a note about Hispanics again, and women again, like no group is monolithic. Very few votes vote that way. I think that a lot of Hispanics, Trump was talking about Mexicans. Mexicans don't necessarily see themselves, as Cubans or Puerto Ricans. I think it's a different thing. You can't just say because he said one offensive thing.
The Cubans are Republicans in the
Yeah, exactly. They've always have been, and they hate that Obama went to Cuba.
More than 29%.
But this is my problem. Trump, it came out that he broke the embargo 20 years ago, and I guess they didn't care about that when he went and had dealings with Cuba. And, Hillary and Obama, they get, penalized in terms of the vote for making that deal with the opening, pivot into Cuba.
Well,
but Trump did the embargo stuff.
Trump was quite smart that he entered the race by admitting he wasn't a choir boy.
Okay, all right, folks, when we come back.
I was terribly disillusioned.
Could a Trump presidency derail some of Prime Minister Trudeau's top priorities, from climate change to foreign policy? Don't go away.